Today is another interesting and exciting session because we are going to be speaking about language. My name is Jameel Yusha'u, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Africa Policy Journal, and I will be leading the conversation. My guest today is Professor John M. Mugane, the director of the African Language Program in the Department of African and African American Studies. He's a linguist specializing in African languages and is a professor of the practice of African languages and cultures at Harvard University. Professor Mugane is the author of The Story of Swahili, published by Ohio University Press. He receives his PhD in linguistics from the University of Arizona, Tucson in 1997, and his master's in linguistics from Ohio University in 1991. A graduate of Kenyatta University with a bachelor's degree in education in languages, literature, and linguistics, which he received in 1987. He is a colossus, I can say, in the field of language, and it's my honor to have you, John.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
As I said in the introduction, these are exciting times, artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, and everything. These are some of the things that we're going to go into. But before that, let's talk about language and policy. Language and policy in Africa. What is your take? How can the use of language help in promoting policy making in the African continent?
It's a very broad question. It's a good one that we actually need to reflect on. The first question is, what is really the language policy in our countries in Africa? And it doesn't appear that it's actually pretty much stated. It is almost, we live by means of just de facto, whatever it is that is actually going on. We know the policy is basically that we speak former colonial languages, education, for even managing the country. The countries except Tanzania, which runs in Swahili, Ethiopia, Amharic. There are a few that might run some of these languages. But so when you're talking about languages as needed in policy, views of language have always been seen to be either languages of a challenge that is actually disturbing something that we're supposed to be doing, the idea of being able to do things together, because people are multilingual, they're speaking very many languages. Others fight for it as a right, that it's a right, somebody to actually have a language. That means I have a right to speak my language and so on. And then when you have these kinds of positions with the colonial language coming onto Africa and staying there, what we call policy, I can only deduce it because when I say French is spoken by the Francophone countries, English is spoken by the Anglophone ones. There is Spanish. There was Italian too in the Horn and so on. But those became official languages because of education. And if you trace every country's history of how they've dealt with languages, it always seems to be a mixture. So you'd use some of the local languages and then the international language. But the policy generally doesn't seem to exist. It just says the four official languages, English, in Kenya, Nigeria, and so on. And then we speak the other languages. When you go to school, English was the prized. And so you learn by realizing that exams have to be done in this language. You have to actually get a job, and you have a job. There's some disciplines you can't do if you didn't get a certain grade in English and so on. And in my era, if you didn't just manage to write an essay in English when you're in high school, which used to call Form 6, nowadays is only up to the fourth level, then you didn't go to the university, regardless of what your other grades were. So the policy seems to have been, it is English that we promote in these places. And there are punitive conditions that actually happen to you if you can't actually go to the university because you didn't write something they call the general paper, which was equivalent to something like, write me an essay about what you've done in the last 5 years and be great. And most people could not write these things, even though they had distinctions in their science. They ended up not really being admitted in these places. So the policy issue on language is really not, it is almost de facto. The idea that we use English for formal things and then we have these other languages that we're dealing. My problem with all that is, of course, that our languages don't go in the idea that can they be used for policy or not be used for policy. They're used all the time. But they fall into the category of African things that are always invisible. One may be misguided by thinking Kenya runs because you're speaking English. Nigeria runs because you're speaking English. All these places run because you speak in Senegal, French, and so on. But it is really not. The production and generation of ideas in these countries is never in English. It's in our languages. That's how we're interacting and so on. But when it comes to the officiating of things, and we actually speak English, we give it to the elite of the English. If you don't know English, you give it to people who know how to speak it, and then they give the information. And we appear to be operating in English. And we are not, because the statistics are very clear. Only single-digit percentages in these countries really speak these languages well.
Professor, you are bringing, you are hitting the nail on the head. Many of our countries speak either, officially. In the case of Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, we speak English. You have countries like Cameroon, Niger, Senegal that speak French. You have other countries that speak Portuguese, and the rest. Mozambique, yeah, exactly. A very classical example. So are these foreign languages or the colonially inherited languages masking the effectiveness of African local languages, especially from flourishing in the global stage?
In my opinion, which is not what people say, I think that's where the heist is. And I was trying to hint at it. Anything that English seems to be doing for our countries, including it being the language of the Constitution, including it being the language of administration, the language of the courts, the courtrooms, the language of the schools, and all the other stuff, is really masking, to use your word, the actual work that our languages are in these places. So when a classroom succeeds, which is multilingual, it is assumed officially they're learning in English, or they're learning in French. But when in that class, you discover the teacher doesn't actually English itself. Now, maybe nowadays they're becoming better. But there has been a time when the teachers who taught us really didn't know English. We were aware, and they're teaching us. So how did we learn? We know that's the official language for the exam. The teacher is speaking English in a strange ways, and so on. If you're in the elite schools and you had a good teacher, then you're lucky to have a foreigner who's teaching these things. So how did we learn? We figured out what we are being taught in our own languages. We explain to each other. Then we go figure out how to write it in the English language. So when we are saying that our languages are actually being disadvantaged, and so no, they're doing all the heavy lifting, but just like regular African studies and so on, they're not going to be visible or audible. That's the whole point of moving. It's like a supply chain. You extract all the knowledge that you can from these languages, but you present it in libraries in English. And in fact, if you try to write your paper, which I've done in the past, you write your paper and give examples in these languages, transcribing the English. Journals will tell you, remove all these language that you actually put there. We just use the English. We believe that that's what they're really saying. In other words, they're not to be visible. And there's total discouragement of these languages. You've had people like talking about the way he was mentioning once, I think it's in YouTube, saying there are so many prizes that go to writing in Africa with only one condition: it'd be in English. So it is English that is being promoted for that stage and so on. And I've had nothing against English or anything. But the thing is that if people are writing and you don't speak the language, well, then what are you really doing? You're denying us the original story, which you're writing really, and then trying to figure out how to tell us in English and so on. So there are many, many things like that one can think about. But the one that was stuck, that was a meeting in Asma, in I think 2000, where they talked about African languages, or calling it against all odds. And they were saying these languages are there, but they're the ones which are vibrant and running all lives. I mean, Hausa land is really speaking Hausa. It's not telling us in English anything. The other people there, everybody's doing languages and these sorts of things. But they cannot rear their head up as the languages of intellectual production, as the languages of professional practice, and all the other stuff. Yet, if we pursue those ones, because I've had a conference now for more than 10 years on African languages in the disciplines and the professions, you'll discover everybody who has a PhD out of Africa uses our languages to get that information. Some try to learn the language, some do learn it very well, and they actually are able to extract, and then they come out here, or they put them into publications, and all of a sudden, these books we are reading have all been sourced from Hausa, Yoruba, Igbo, Zulu, whatever language they have there. But there's no evidence at all that these languages are existing. So They're part of intellectual production. So you have now to go the extra mile. And that's why the institution BA right now, Harvard, is of distinction in the sense that you can learn any African language you want.
You mean at the Center for African
In
Studies?
this, in the not in
department.
the Department of African and African Studies. The center, of course, is a big support. The center runs the whole place. We belong to the Department of African and African American Studies.
Yeah.
When they established the track, the PhD track of African Studies, the foundation said to be languages.
So you're saying that a person can come and study a PhD or in Swahili or in Hausa language or in Fulfulde or in Wolof in the native language at Harvard University. That facility is available.
Well, there now you have to be multilingual.
Of course,
we have to go back. We have to go back and then talk. Who are we talking about? Talking about an African. Africans. The cliche is that lingua franca of Africans is multilingualism. We find somebody who is actually a monolingual in Africa, they must be living in luxury or in subscribed places. But very few countries are largely lingual.
Yeah.
You can mention Rwanda, Burundi, Somalia, Swaziland. The others have a lot of these people. So the idea is that I don't know that actually helps to mention these sorts of things, but the dynamism of languages, this is the point I was trying to make, is really lost in the idea that we are saying they are not visible, let's learn them, let's go love them, let's go do all these things, or we now need to get our kids to learn these languages because they're getting lost and so on. And that's not where African languages are thriving. African languages are thriving in the actual solving of problems every day and in daily thinking. So we have to go back and define language to the advantage of what we do in Africa. Language defined as a means of communication is disadvantageous to us. Because what you're saying is basically, extract everything or whatever you're going to do. The original language doesn't matter really. What you need is just get it in this. And there's a lot of money for translating things away from this place and so on. And not vice versa and all the rest. But the point is that constitution that we treasure in Kenya, in South Africa, in other places, was written under trees, in villages, and I know colleagues of mine were sitting, they were asking each other, so what is this word constitution mean? They defined it themselves. They say, actually one group said they concluded it's a relation, what governs the relationship between me and you as people who live here, what are our rights and so on. People got all this. Finally, it appears in English. Then the next time I meet someone who says, you see, English is a Kenyan language. It has given you, it is one that actually holds the constitution. You didn't see all the work we did with it. That's African studies. Everything is happening in vernacular languages. But when it comes out in French and English, which means for Africa, really, English and French translation is like an app. You finish everything you're doing, then you apply it in the app and it gives people language. They want to share the knowledge. That's for sure.
Interesting.
Now, maybe that's political. But again, for me.
Yeah, you mentioned something that I found quite fascinating, which is the idea of African languages as a means of intellectual production. So there are, for instance, if you go in the continent, in different parts of Africa, you find amazing writers who produce language in native languages. You find them in Swahili. You find them in my hometown of Kano, for instance. We have what is called the Kano market literature,
right.
where you have actually women who are sitting in their houses actually writing novels, but nobody is paying attention to this. So, and you go to countries like Kenya, I'm sure that people that are writing in Swahili or in other native languages, but yet they don't get the exposure. The writers become known and accepted as producers of knowledge when they either translate those works into English language or they write in English language. So you know about, Wole Soyinka, you know about Chimamanda and the rest. So what policies do you need? What kind of environment do you need to make those who write in native African languages also to prosper and flourish, rather than just making the language an extractive industry, as is described by some?
What gets us extracted is very little. It only feeds the West. By the last statistics I have, knowledge produced according to what is actually out there, only 3% really of knowledge that we consider to be the cream of knowledge and all that is really from Africa. Now, you can't tell me we are really 3% of the intellectual that is actually happening. Who is this 3%? We don't even have to go there. But the idea is that basically it is that these languages, we are in the footnotes. So if we are not there in the 97%, we are 3%, you will find our names in the footnotes of all these other things. And that's why I'm saying, I'm not saying there is anything for anything. We have to acknowledge people we got information from. But basically, where the original documents that actually you read, that actually came from our languages that then actually show that these languages are actually the ones that are carrying information. Some of the works that have been there. Boston, Fabungo, took me to Senegal once, and I went to Mali as well, and other places, and we were collecting documents. It's amazing what you find in those things. These shopkeepers and these people have kept records for ages. They can tell when people need diarrhea medicine, cold medicine, and so on, by the fact that there is a time they fly off the shelves and they keep records with names of people who owe them money or they owe them change, whatever it is that they actually do. Knowledge is huge. It's operating in Africa. The only thing is that it never raises itself to the surface, because what academia does is that it actually follows its own pursuits. We are always given the topics to deal with. All the time, we handle it topic. Structural adjustments is what you're dealing with. Okay, we deal with that for several years, and we get given the next one, and we keep on loitering around. But the thing is that the continent is producing, and that's what that Asthma Declaration was showing. It was saying, they were saying they have declarations about 12 things. They're saying there. Some of them interesting because they don't kind of spell out languages. Because,
can you share some of them?
Well, some of them is just to say that African language must take the responsibility of speaking for the continent. And the thing is that they are speaking. If our languages are not being used, they would be dead. So we are using them every day. What are we saying? Language is not an instrument of communication. In fact, it is an instrument of thought. At least Chomsky says it is an instrument of thought. And it is actually part of human biology. It is something that is actually ingrained in you that you can't actually separate from things. What does this mean? There are very many reasons. Even as I'm talking, I can look, when I look at it, like, there's so many things you're hearing in your head. You're talking to yourself and you're doing other things. So really, the most of the language that we actually use is not spoken. This we call it the externalized, and it could be externalized by mouth or by sign or by other things. So language is not modal neutral. I mean, it's not like modal specific, module specific. Like you have to use language. You can actually use other things. So, but what is really going on? Billions and billions more thoughts have actually gone through your head. So it means it is our thinking. It's an instrument of thought. Therefore, anytime you tell me, stop Kikuyu, stop Swahili, stop Luo, stop Hausa, and you give me, these are the language, what you've done is you've attached a prosthetic on me, especially if I'm older. If I'm younger, I might actually make it work. But what you've done is that you give me a prosthetic arm. So, but the person who the African desires and is always trying to be is a multilingual person. He says, no, there is value in this language. So how is that their value? Because I'm doing something to it. That's why in our continent, you never find an African at an airport saying, I'm rushing to Rwanda to learn Kinyarwanda. I'm going to now rush to Nigeria because they speak Yoruba over there. I need to actually learn Yoruba. So I'm just going to go there and learn. No. They're saying, oh, there is a good deal over there of learning something. They go learn something. They go over there. They start speaking these languages. We are all multilingual, but we never, the one secret about Africa is that we never take language exams. We fail those because, again, they are bringing us the form that they actually consider to be good. So,
yet when we find ourselves within the society, we begin naturally to acquire those languages.
You hear the languages. There is a time Kenya said there was no A in English several years back. They started with A minus, and the A minuses were countable. So the headmaster who had those 2 or 3 of those were celebrities now because, and then you ask, what really went on? Is it, there's no Kenyan reason that, yet when you go to the streets, everybody's speaking English. You can understand everything and so on. So there's this whole other scandal that goes on with this test that we are giving. But the African is somebody who shows up like this and says, oh, you say that bread is tapalapa, or you are saying something else, and say, oh, I'm going to call it that. You start listening. This thing we call Ubuntu in Bantu is actually saying, you try the other person's language. You start seeing what but you're not saying I'm here to learn the language. I'm actually trying to understand what it is that you're doing and you're saying. And so we're becoming human. Language then is as a result of all that. So we have not proficiencies that are testable, but we have repertoires. I mean, if you talk about maize, if that's what me and you like to grow, then we talk about it and so on. But anyway, probably that's...
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor Mugane. This is getting even more interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, this is APJ Chat with Professor Mugane, brought to you directly from the Harvard Kennedy School by the Africa Policy Journal. Now, Professor Mugane, you touched on a number of issues, but I want us to, move into another thing, which is the most exciting thing that is happening around today, around artificial intelligence. Where do you see African languages in this race for artificial intelligence, especially with the emergence of ChatGPT, OpenAI, and we are seeing the tremendous development that are coming almost every month, every week sometimes. You see new announcements about it. What's your take?
Well, I have conflicting emotions. One is excitement. I'm already in a project myself that we are calling the Omiluga, which is dealing with Somali and Somali. Did I say Somali before? Maybe I did.
Yeah.
So this
I only had one Nigerian language there.
Which one?
Fulani, you only mentioned Fulani, yeah.
Fulani just comes out of...
But anyway, it's all over West Africa.
In my visit to West Africa, I got there and they saw me and they said, you're Fulani. You look like Igbo. And Fulani, I liked it because it is the most widespread language in the continent. It's in 14 countries. It's larger than anything. And so, and the folk there are pretty amazing. Yeah. But the thing is, so, it is there for... how did I choose those languages? It is important to say. It is the force around me. So I have some of them, like Kimber, who is a graduate student who came for 2 years in my office, taught me about computer science and language, and until I got to the point where I could actually say, let's have a project. Then, though, it's also the same, some older students that I had before and other things like. So they are those. So the choice is, but it's only a beginning because again, we have 40, 50 of these languages in the country itself, and then Africa's the 2,000 we talk about. So this is just a tip of the iceberg, and we're going to do more. Yeah. So, but what do I think about this? Yeah. I'm excited by it in the sense that this whole idea that people are smart and intelligent because they speak English and French may finally go away because what we are trying to build is that you speak Hausa. If the systems work and I hear Kikuyu, I speak Kikuyu, you hear Hausa. We are removing this barrier.
This assumption that an educated and a smart person is the one who speaks English, French, or Portuguese.
And you'll see that you'll see the mechanisms in which debates go. Yep. You're impressed by debates because of the turn of phrase and all the other stuff. What language does when you're told to use somebody else is that you abdicate intellectual advantage. Look, if you want to play around with Africa with languages, show up in Tanzania and say, let's have a conversation. This time we conducted in Swahili about economics. You will not have a chance to really say much because they will be tearing it apart. You can smart. They know how to use it completely. You come to English, we are still struggling with the grammars and all the other stuff and all these other concepts and so on. So what I'm saying is that it may reach a point whereby somebody comes and says, now I can't speak that language. Therefore, all I did was gather data from whatever. And then we're saying, what data did you gather and so on? Now, you're not. And then we will demand, come back and tell us what you wrote about us and so on. And you tell us, we hear it in our languages and we actually, maybe we'll just be telling you didn't get it or you got it or whatever it is. But a space is opening whereby one might hear these things. But it's not that clear that it is the case because our language is very low resourced. Very little is available for us to do. So now one of the tricky things is that are we going to be translating things from the Western world into our languages in order to build this machine? Or is there another mechanism? So we are grappling with all this. But it is seeming to, like we've done some prototypes that actually show it is going to be the case. So now that means the exciting part for me because of the profession, because I'm stuck between the intellectual production and the professional work. It was, that's where language is.
Mm.
You think about things, you do things, and so on. So in those spaces, things like the biggest project there, he's really working on language and law in the law school, universities, my colleagues there, where our courtroom, you show up in the courts. It's not the American court. This is a British one, which is you impress the judge. There is no jury, and so on. So here you are, you're speaking language A, they're speaking language Y. They're talking to each other. Nobody is understanding what they're doing. One cannot understand what is being accused of and what is responding. The court itself doesn't know what these people are saying. There is somebody who's been brought in to report. So all we do in Kenya is to say, oh, Jameel is speaking Hausa. So we collect anybody that name in the street and bring in to it. Can you explain to them what we are saying? And we end up with delivery of sentence and so on, or even expiring and so on. So what I did here, I got the students country Kenya who are studying and older ones to ask them, shouldn't we just go back to a country and have a class action lawsuit to release everybody from being jailed because basically they didn't understand what was being talked about in the courtrooms. It was not, it is then it's not both to actually have them in jail. Well, they frowned at me, they corrected me very, very patiently that law does not go like that. They explained to me. I said, okay, let's try something. So we went to talk about these things, and we've been doing that for a long time. The idea that you can now have, that's why I'm even in this particular element of trying to do AI, is that the very fact that you could walk into a courtroom anywhere in Africa, speak your language and be heard by the judge as you're saying things, and the other person actually is
listen in another language.
And we come up with a thing. That is actually what language is supposed to be. You don't show up over there and people are telling you things you don't understand. In Kenya, if you go looking, our court cases are. So if you went on the Google and said, search English, you find English over there and you find a lot of mistrials and a lot of other things happen. Courts dismiss, case just remanded, the person is remanded in custody over it because basically they're not understanding English and we can't find the particular language they actually speak, so to bring somebody here. And so it takes forever. It's a mess. So this exciting part about that is that it's going to be able to make somebody be heard in their language. And then those who are listening there, like us, if you know Hausa, you can hear the case and how it was going, then we can interpret it. There is that kind of thing. Knowledge then is going to be that once we have it online, then the same thing, we go to YouTube and learn something. You can learn all kinds of things. You can learn how to do agriculture, you can learn physics. All these things are in your language. You can actually understand how to do things. If jobs are being advertised, even though it's being advertised in a certain language, you can actually be told, that aids somebody who is a second language speaker. Because language speaker, you may know how to do things, but you're not getting the actual reading. I didn't know this until these reading things started showing up, and now I'm just putting it on PDF. And as I'm driving to work, it's reading me the whole thing. And I can choose a voice. Is it Obama's voice? Is it somebody else's over there? They come reading, and I hear the intonations, the pauses, and all the other stuff. And you actually hear the argumentation is even in the intonations and all these other things. So all these things are going to now be streamlined. So it's a very exciting time. The only thing is, of course, now digital access and the ownership of these things that we are building is Africa then going again to be sidelined in all these. They are going to be owned.
That's exactly where I'm coming. And because artificial intelligence works with data, you have to put in the data.
Yeah.
So is Africa already in a disadvantage? And how does Africa catch up?
Right now, there are small fights going. There is the groups that I know of, which are very impressive. There's Massacre in South Africa. They have been doing artificial intelligence. There's a professor friend of mine who is very gung-ho trying these things. He's the one I met first because he's one of our fellows. I've been directing the Harvard South Africa Fellows program.
Okay.
He was one of our fellows. And he's in the University of Pretoria. I will remember his name shortly. But the idea is that he has been fighting. Massacre means let's do it together. In course, I don't know which one of the two. But the idea is that Africans should be involved in this and also be the owners of the knowledge they're producing. And there's some countries, actually not even in Africa, that have actually said collecting data from us, where is it going to go? And those are some of the things you have to grapple with. What I'm building should definitely be belonging to Kenya, to Africans, and so on. Otherwise, we'll end up with all my information in iCloud. One judge did ask me, said, "You're going to come to my courtroom." He's one of the judges who's telling me, "I'll be welcome to fill in this courtroom. We can actually build this thing," but he says, then you put everything in iCloud over there, and then, of course, you're paying for it, and somebody will say, "No, you can't get your information because you can pay this and the other." It will escalate. There's that logistical issue that is actually up there. But for us to be involved in ourselves doing artificial intelligence, involving ourselves and so on, is working great. Fortunately, Kenya is really quite ahead. You can find these sorts of individuals there. It's always been praised as Silicon Savannah or something, but there is something going on there. Nigeria is somewhat, is actually very big, and South Africa. Now, the question is, what do you do? Because do you team up with Google? They give you money to do things, and where this information into all those things I don't think about. But what I see is a future where knowledge is not going to actually be depending on language, pontification, and all these other things about being the leader, the leading mind of this and that. It's not going to be just be, oh, this is the leading mind. It is actually going to be, we can all, what is really going on and so on.
So on a final note, before we conclude, what role do you think African universities can play in this transformation, particularly in the era of artificial intelligence, in supporting African languages?
It's a good question, because see where I'm sitting. It's already in the books. It's a policy here that if you're going to do knowledge about Africa, you need an African language. If you're going to be in the university anyway, I don't know, take a foreign language. Language is actually really something that is seen to be important. Although there's always somebody who raise up an issue and say, why language and not something else? Yet we've been saying it is an instrument. It is all these things. And the fact that you say it in one language doesn't mean that now it is actually universal. So the one thing that we haven't done in Africa is that, are we even involved with these languages at all? Are there universities teaching these languages? I don't know of situations where for learning this. I know Swahili has been learned in Ghana, has been learned in South Africa.
Yoruba, Igbo, at least from the perspective of Nigeria, they are taught in Nigeria in universities.
They're taught in universities.
Up to PhD level.
In Kenya, unless I'm really mistaken, to be Swahili, Arabic, and foreign ones. I haven't been privy to the idea that there's actually somebody doing any of that. Just then, they're not teaching. And the thing is that it's because of bad press. Because again, we bought into the Western notion that multilingualism is a problem. That's what the West does. That's why, if they're monolingually driven, because monolingualism means then the podium has only one mic, which is English. And therefore, we were told that these are things that the ones that make us hate each other, that with the tribalism and all these things brought, ethnicity is brought by language, and that if you speak your language next to somebody else, and so on. And Africa has been operating like all the time. I have seen mother's generation, somebody will go and speak their own language to a person who doesn't speak the language. The person understands, says, oh, you want potatoes and this and the other. Nobody's actually saying, why so full of yourself? You're talking here. But in the offices, they say somebody will be arrogant enough to actually exclude other people by speaking their language to this other person. And then we are supposed to get mad. We're supposed to be saying, this is a fool. He thinks he can actually brag with his own language and leave us out. Whatever he's saying is not of value for me to know. But somebody else is being offended saying, no, they're speaking their language. Why are you? Africans are not living like we always speak this language. In fact, if you go to houses of worship, you'll be shocked. People are, if you see, you think they're noisemakers, but people are always next to somebody else and they're whispering. So I used to say, these people are making noise in the church. No, they're not. This one is trying to explain to the person. The other one is very intent. What are they saying? What did that? All the languages are being utilized there. And that's why I say anything that succeeds in English and French in Africa, apart from the little minute 1% of people who command these things, and none of that work is being done through this translation, the hash thing, and that knowledge actually comes up by that. So the idea would be, at least, borrow a leaf from this place and say the foundation of understanding is in your language, and therefore universities should be teaching these things.
So your main policy recommendation is African universities should increase the effort in teaching and do research in African languages. Multilingualism is not bad.
It is not only that. It is to add that everything that works in our countries is really premised on those languages. There is no courtroom that works without those languages.
Yes.
There is no way you go to hospital anywhere without our languages. There is even learning when they say we've switched to other languages and so on. It's really our language that are still doing this. So let's be honest and know that these languages are the ones that actually carry the day. And they're the ones we are learning from, so that somebody who comes from a rural place, doesn't seem to have learned much English, they're passing their exams. We can even tell by the types of questions that they ask. Math, for instance. If you ask people abstract things that they don't deal with, math is failed.
Yes.
If you ask them about things that they actually can relate to, like some students of mine have said, they go to Africa. These kids are not learning math in the class, they're teaching therefore. When they go inside in the evening, they go to the marketplace and they find this kid is doing more multiplications of
Absolutely,
math
yes.
at the selling point.
The market, yeah.
And any teacher would actually say, wait a minute, these kids know the math. So what is the problem? It is a language. And of course, whoever speaks the language very well excludes others. So when language is used as a power taker instead of a power giver, then it becomes the idea of diminishing people, because I'm telling you, you tie your arm when you start speaking another language and there's a quarrel going on. Do you want to go to a shouting match? If it was ever good, shouting matches are not good, but would you ever want to go to a good discussion with somebody in their language and you're trying to really figure out what they're saying? Then you actually translate everything you're doing and actually giving it to them. But it is starting to look like that more and more in Africa, because the younger generation is dumping this language. So the bigger thing with the university there is actually to go there, not just teach them, but actually now be the ones who do the work we're trying to do, collect these languages. And collecting data is not translating sentences, it is actually teaching people and going to hospital, seeing what people see, a doctor-patient interaction. See somebody else actually in court trying to defend themselves and so on, and these are the ones responding and so on. That is real data. The other one is the machine one. Just take all these sentences and try to translate them and so on. It will provide some things. But in the end, I think the universities, to teach language is actually having the benefit of learning the language. If you don't teach a language, you can't learn it. I'm a linguist. I've described them here and there, but once you go teaching it, you say, wait a minute, I'm really learning this thing. And then learning to be done. Social engagement. You engage others. We don't learn languages because we want to learn them. They are actually an epiphenomenon of social engagement. Language, you learn language by interacting with people. When we are doing something together, like putting a fire out of a house that is burning. I'm not saying, did you tell me that in Hausa? No, I hear you saying that kind of thing. I say, that's fire. That's water. That is so. That is clothes and all the stuff. I collect that. Then I go next time and so on. I start building a repertoire out of human relationships, out of Ubuntu. Otherwise, we're going to become exactly that, like that machine we're talking about. We're training a machine. ChatGPT is going to tell us everything, but don't have a human face. Language is totally human. And therefore, when you're making it go into the machine, we have to be the ones who are actually doing this. So the university needs to teach them for its own benefit of people able to learn. And then for the language to actually produce and give us the knowledge that we actually want. We can translate physics. Because physics is not a foreign thing to African languages. Physics is everywhere. It is not a phenomenon in English. Or math or whatever it is that we actually do. Anyway, sorry.
No, it's getting more exciting, but you are just getting into more interesting areas. Teaching physics in African languages, probably studying medicine in an African language, studying engineering in an African language. That would be really an exciting time, but unfortunately time is against us. So, John, I think we might need to have another session some other time. It's a pleasure to have you. Ladies and gentlemen,
thank you.
This is APJ Chat, brought to you live from the Harvard Kennedy School by the Africa Policy Journal. And the topic of our discussion today was on African languages. And it was a pleasure speaking to Professor Mugane. I would like to thank all those who supported us in coming up with this edition, especially my colleague Adawobi, who had been standing and supporting us all the way. On behalf of the team members of the Africa Policy Journal, Muhammad Jameel Yusha'u is saying